So this is some introductory information before we get to the learning objectives given in the course schedule. Court structure, authority, and jurisdiction are things you should automatically consider when you're doing case law research. So from this point forward, you won't be specifically instructed to consider these things because you should take for granted that a successful researcher always has these things in mind. Court opinions are a primary source of law. Opinions are the law either because no statute exists to deal with the legal question at hand or because the court was asked to interpret existing legislation. Trial courts are where factual disputes are resolved, and many cases will stop at this level. The decision of a trial court is not case law. When a trial court decision is appealed, it is heard by an appellate court. Case law happens in the appellate courts, and these are the decisions you're looking at when you research case law. Finally, if someone is unhappy with the decision of an appellate court, they can request that their case be heard by the Supreme Court. And again, these decisions are also case law. So this structure applies to both state and federal court systems. I have case law at the appellate level starred because there are some things to consider when you're looking at these kinds of decisions. First, you want to know, has this case been appealed? And if so, how did the higher court rule? A higher court can either affirm or agree with the lower court's decision, or it can overturn the lower court's decision. For example, the U.S. Supreme Court can overturn a decision of the U.S. Court of Appeals. So starting from the bottom of the diagram then, a factual dispute is decided in a trial court. The losing party files an appeal in an intermediate appellate court. The opinion of the appellate court becomes case law if that opinion is published and if there is no further appeal. If there is further appeal, then the decision of the higher court becomes case law. So what do we mean by published? This can get confusing because we all know what published means, and it's reasonable to assume that unpublished is just the opposite. But when we're talking about case law, it means something specific to say whether an opinion is published or unpublished. So published opinions are those that are found in reporters. So that's just what it sounds like, they're published. But a better word for unpublished opinions is non-precedential opinions. Non-precedential opinions are those not designated by the court to be printed in a print reporter. Non-precedential decisions at the federal level can be found in the Federal Appendix published by West, and at the state level you can find them by contacting the court clerk, and you can often find them online. Non-precedential opinions are not treated as binding precedent, and you should always consult court rules before citing an unpublished or non-precedential opinion. So case law matters because of the concept of precedent. Courts look to other courts' interpretations of the law when making decisions. Once a court decides a factual dispute, other courts should follow the same ruling when presented with the same facts. However, whether or not a court must follow the ruling of another court depends on authority and jurisdiction. Case law is primary authority. Whether or not it is mandatory or persuasive depends on the level of court and the jurisdiction. So within a single jurisdiction, the highest court is mandatory authority for all lower courts in the same jurisdiction. So the U.S. Supreme Court is mandatory authority for all courts in the United States. Now, knowing which jurisdiction you're dealing with is going to save you some time because it will help you determine where to look first. Opinions from higher courts in my jurisdiction are mandatory authority, so ideally I would find an on-point case from a higher court within my jurisdiction. But if I'm working on a problem that hasn't been presented before to a court in my own jurisdiction, I can look to decisions made by courts in other jurisdictions for persuasive authority. So the court in my jurisdiction doesn't have to follow what these other courts have done, but I can use this information to make my argument stronger. So to sum up, case law is a primary source of law. It is based on the concept of precedent, and understanding which cases will help you with your research problem depends on understanding court structure, jurisdictions, and whether or not an opinion is mandatory or persuasive authority. When researching cases, be aware of details like whether a case is published or unpublished, what jurisdiction you are in, and which court wrote the decision. So remember, from this point forward, It will be assumed that you know to consider court structure, jurisdiction, and authority when researching any problem.